Welcome to this week's episode of the PS Week Inspire podcast. I'm Morgan, and today my guest is Kristen, and you are going to probably love this as much as I did. So I first met Kristen when I went to a weekend retreat that was focused on the mind-body connection, on the wisdom of our bodies. We did a lot of yoga, meditation. We talked about food and nutrition, and Kristen was there to provide the meals and the snacks for everyone. She's an intuitive food maker, and she also talked with us about some of the ins and outs of nutrition and how our bodies metabolize foods and how the mind-body connection actually plays a much bigger role than we are super familiar with in our Western society. So in a culture of like the diet culture, and in the kind of in this like system where we demonize certain foods and we say these foods are bad and these foods are good, I find that just such a weird thing that we do, that we attach a morality to the foods that we eat. And we talk about that in this episode as well. So if you are just, continuing on this journey of having a better relationship with yourself, not just with, your inner life and your thoughts, but also with your body, you are going to love this episode. One of the things that I like so much about our conversation is that we talk about how we can, what we can do when we have like reached the threshold of enough is enough, whether or not our bodies have told us that, or whether we have this inkling that something is going to go off the rails if we continue to do life the way that we are. So if we are in these chronic states of stress, if we are eating poorly, if we are not sleeping well, if we're having all of these health things come up that we don't know what to do with, that we don't know, and even, a lot of the ways that we have tried to medicate or therapy them away, Kristen is going to give us some additional insight into how we can approach healing our bodies and be a better communicator with our bodies and have a better relationship with our bodies. So I think you are really going to enjoy this episode. If you have not given us a rating and review yet on this podcast, head over to wherever you're listening to your episode right now, whether you're on Apple or Spotify, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and then give us a rating and review. We'd really appreciate that. So thank you for joining me for this episode. I am so glad that you are here. Kristen, thank you so much for making this happen. I shared with people in the intro how I first came to know about you and the work that you do through the retreat that we were both at. But can we just talk about like how you came to the work that you're doing now? And I have so many questions about some people come to it because of the way that they were raised. Some people come to it because of health issues that they're trying to get resolved. Some people come to it through a spiritual practice or path. And I'm so curious how you ended up doing what you're doing now.
Yeah. So I kind of have a little running joke. I am hearing impaired, and I say that I have a body that knows that I'm hearing impaired. So it is very loud in terms of what works for it and what doesn't work for it. And it lets me know within an instant. Instead of making that my crutch or, playing a victim to, oh, woe is me, and this isn't happening well, my body doesn't seem to be functioning well, it's been more of an exploratory process of, hey, like what's going on and what is this, what's happening here, and how can I assist you better? And so I've kind of taken almost outside approach to having my body be its own entity and really asking questions that are engaging to it for it to give me the answers of how I can better function inside of it and work alongside of it in tandem. So because of that, I feel like my whole life has been in pursuit of really listening to the very loud answers that I get from my body that loves to call me on my integrity, keep me on my path, keep me moving in the ways that I need to keep moving and growing, essentially. Yeah.
Were you born hearing impaired, or did that happen later in childhood?
No. So at the age of 3, I got chickenpox, and I got them very severely. So I got them in my ears. It did nerve damaging. They're about bloody and blistery, about the size of quarters. And I was hospitalized and in a coma for a week. And once I came out of that, it was actually my brother who realized that I didn't quite hear as well. So they took me to get audiology testing. They were like, hey, our best guess is that she's probably hearing impaired because of how severely she had chickenpox and it did nerve damaging inside of her ears. So I grew up wearing hearing aids, going to a speech pathologist. I definitely was on the slower end developmentally, late bloomer. I think it took me till like third or fourth grade to like really know how to read. It took me till second grade my ABCs. I remember telling my mom, like, hey, I finally learned my ABCs. And she was like, what? You're in second grade? Like, you didn't know that? And I'm like, no, I just been faking it. Um, and so there is the gift in the side of, I think I err on the side of sometimes overconfidence because a lot of times I don't know what's going on. So I've just always had this presence of like, you just figure it out, and that's literally been my whole life. So for 35 years, I've been in the process of just figuring out. Lo and behold, this is actually like what adulting is, right? It's just the ability to figure out things as they come up. So
Yeah, no kidding. That's well, and it's like it's such a terrible surprise to become an adult and be like, oh shit, like just the aging didn't make it so that I'm like, I got it dialed in. Now my 8-year-old was telling me one time he had to go into the other room and he was really afraid of the dark. This is several years ago. And he said, when I'm a grown up, I won't be afraid of the dark anymore. And I was thinking, well, that's not really how it works, buddy. It's like, it's not just about like the aging that helps us move into these like new skills. It's like, no, it actually has to be developed all along the way. Otherwise you end up as an adult with the same kind of things that come up from when you were a kid. Anyway, we don't have to go into that, but your hearing impairment ended up creating, it sounds like this like very trusting relationship with your body where you had to rely on your other senses to really tell you what was up and give you some direction. And then therefore like moving forward with confidence that your body knew, even if you didn't have like the auditory input to be able to align with what you knew in your body.
100%.
That's a huge gift.
It is. And I did a shamanic apprenticeship where we had to go to the Seven Pleiades sisters and, ask, one question. And my question was, why am I hearing impaired? And within a matter of seconds, it was, so that you can hear you can hear your truth. You can hear what's real for you. And so everyone's like still on their journeys like an hour later. And, within 5 minutes, I was like, okay, well, I'm done. And my teacher's like, are you done? And I'm like, yeah, no, it's real clear.
Is it snack time yet?
Pretty much. Yeah, and so it's been a really sweet. I feel like within everything, there's a little bit of like a downside, and then there's also a gift. So later in life, it's been really sweet to kind of open up into the gift side of what this really means for me and how I move through the world and how I'm able to assimilate information and also take information from many different fields of awareness and smush them together into also what's true for me, and then how to regurgitate that information in a way that's helpful for other people as well, right?
Yeah. So you grew up and you're navigating this world with a hearing impairment, and then you go to college. And what were you studying at school?
Yeah, so I was a double major in psychology and communications. I didn't actually know what I wanted to major in, but I did know that anything that I wanted to learn, I wanted it to be helpful to myself. So it seemed like knowing about the psychology of humans and also how to communicate were two great things. Yeah, during that time, once I graduated college, I grew up pretty healthy. My parents were very, Midwestern. So it was a full plate of food, but a very balanced plate of food in terms of protein, vegetables, fruit, and like a salad, right? So when I went to college, it was like, oh, cool, I can have whatever I want. So there's a soft serve ice cream machine. There's, alcohol for the first time in my life. There's all these things that kind of could very quickly disrupt the gut if not kept in balance. So I think I definitely gave myself a little gut dysbiosis. And by the time I graduated a little bit early, so within 3.5 years, by the time I was graduating, I was probably the most depressed I'd ever been, the most anxious I'd ever been, and the most just, had all sorts of symptoms from acne to bloating to indigestion to just not really having energy. And it was such a disappointing realization to come up against. I'm at this point in my life where I finally am ready to graduate and go out into the world. And I feel stuck. I feel slow. I feel stagnant. I feel like I'm not even capable of hitting that next threshold, and that I'm not even excited for it. And I realized how young I was and how much of my life I had yet to go. And I was like, this is a solid no. I got to figure this out. So I had a girlfriend in college who went to a vegan culinary school, and she was very successful with a lot of that. And so I ended up going to myself a raw vegan culinary school in Mendocino, California, and wanted to shake out some health answers. And I definitely found things that worked for me, and I found many things that also didn't work for me from that diet as well.
I wonder how many people automatically look to their nutrition when they start having symptoms like that. You know, like it, unless you're in an environment where that is suggested, I think most often people are like, oh, I need a different, you know, I need a different face wash, or I need to take these like these antacids to keep the bloating down. And maybe just not having like that connection, that internal connection that says, oh, maybe what I'm putting in my body actually is impacting my brain function. And I don't know how much of that is because of how, like in Western cultures particularly, we tend to view our brains as separate from our body somehow, that like my thinking process, my cognition should be separate from the rest of my body processes. But the more that we're understanding about things like the gut microbiome, and we're understanding how hormones work, and we're understanding all this signaling, we're realizing that the Western way of thinking about ourselves is like these separate people. We're coming into an understanding of the need for holistic care, inside and out, head to toe. And I think that I love that you right away understood that, oh, it could be the things that I'm eating are actually impacting this depression and this anxiety. That's huge.
Yeah, so I'm very fortunate in the sense that I don't know if you want to call it a rebel self, but I've always
Yeah.
just listened to myself, even as a kid. So I had a really good doctor, and I had a knee injury one time. And she said, hey, I'm going to give you this knee brace. You need to wear the knee brace, but eventually you need to wean off the knee brace, because if you keep wearing the knee brace, your knee will get weaker. And I heard that as, okay, cool. And I was like, is that always true? And she was like, yes, 100%. Your body will learn to rely on something if it doesn't, have to, if it's not forced to grow itself. I was like, okay. So I got glasses right around that time. And I was like, well, this seems like I'm still developing. If I can't drink alcohol until I'm 21 because my brain's still developing, then why would I put glasses on a young age with eyeballs that are still developing? I'm actually just not going to wear them. I also didn't like wearing them because I had a thin tear film, and contacts really dried my eyes out. And I was only allowed to wear them for 2 hours a day. And then I had to switch to glasses. So it just seemed like a whole process that I wasn't engaged with. So I just stopped, and I went to the doctor 2 years later, eye doctor, and he was like, hey, so like your stigmatism's gone, your vision's increased like 15%. Like I've never seen anything like this. And I was like, cool, let me tell you my theory. And I told him the knee brace theory, and he was like, no, that's wrong. And I was like, no, but like, I'm telling you what I did. And he's like, there's no way that that's possible. And I'm like, but it is possible. It just happened. And he was like, nope, that's not a thing. And then same thing later in college, I went to a dermatologist and was like, hey, I feel like when I eat ice cream, my skin breaks out pretty heavily, like the next couple of days. And he was like, yep, whatever you eat has nothing to do with, your skin. They're completely separate. We'll put you on birth control. We'll put you on Accutane. I'd never watched my health plummet so hard with trying to be in college, be on Accutane and drink, which you're not supposed to do. But of course, what's a college kid going to do? Probably not listen and break the rules on some level. So I feel like, and then I was also prescribed Adderall, and I would get night sweats horribly in the middle of the night, just highly stimulated to the point where I'd have to wake up and go take a shower, switch to the other side of the bed because I actually left a body print. And I remember going to University of Michigan doctor being like, hey, is this a side effect of taking Adderall? And he was like, nope, you can read all the side effects. It's not in there, but I can give you anti-sweating medication, and we'll go that route. So every single time I felt like that I went to a doctor, they told me something that fundamentally didn't feel true for me. And they said, nope, you're wrong. I know what's going on, and you're going to do this other thing. And the reality of the situation is the other things, even though I tried them, weren't a real solution, and they didn't help until I listened to whatever it is that was coming through for me. So again, with the gift of listening or hearing what's true for me, I feel like that's just been such a very clear outlet and like very markable periods in my life where it's just been like, nope, I'm the authority on what's happening in my body. And that's always going to be true. And that's true for every single one of my clients, right? Where I make sure that they know that they are 100% the authority.
So you're in school, you're dealing with all of these symptoms. The medical community is not listening to you, and also what they're prescribing is not solving the problem. So what do you do next?
Just listen to your own body and go from there. Yeah. So I went to a raw vegan culinary school, started drinking a lot of green juice. That seemed to help my body regulate a lot better. Absorption can happen very quickly through the small intestine, so it's very easy for the body to get nutrients that way. I started looking into Max Gerson. He's somebody who much later in the 60s, I think even 70s, did a lot of research on cancer patients and healing cancer patients with juice and a lot of coffee enemas and a very calm nervous system lifestyle that all of these people started to remiss out of stage 4 cancer. And yeah, I just started to realize that there is so many different ways of thinking and believing in the world that aren't necessarily native to Western culture.
Mm.
Um, that a lot of these other answers seem more true to me in my body at that time than the Western stuff, because the Western stuff also felt a little gaslighty of, hey, your experiences doesn't matter. Like whatever you're feeling can't possibly be true. And I know best. So you just listen. And I was like, that just seems fundamentally wrong.
Hmm. I wonder how much of that came with the advent of like new technologies within science, because once we can start actually looking at things and changing our hypotheses, things can shift very, very quickly. And it has been really interesting to see that there's a nice shift in some of those communities to say, oh, some of these like practices or ways of living that have been around for thousands of years, like maybe they didn't know technically why it worked, but it works, and the science is bearing out now to show what people have intuitively known for thousands of years, that actually works with this human organism. And so much of it has to do with, I think, this also belief in Western cultures and in many Western religions that we are separate from our environment, not understanding that this physical body is also part of this physical world. So how have you like, as you went to this culinary school and learned more about food systems and how to change what you were putting in your body, and you said before we started recording that you got really specific about paying attention to what works in your body, which is
Mhm.
hard for many people because it's like, please just give me like the 5 steps and I'll just follow those exactly. But really what it takes is more work of paying attention what does work for you.
Totally. Um, yeah, and that's a moving target. A lot of times I work with
Mm,
clients and let them know that right off the bat, like, hey, this solution might work for a year, it might work for 5 years, it might work for 5 months. It's kind of your job to build the rapport and the relationship with your body that you're always sensing and always feeling what's true in that moment. And the more that we kind of become in touch with that, the more successful we are in every other way of relating, whether it's to the environment outside of us, to the relationships that we have with our loved ones, to our family members, to the community. The deeper rapport and listening that we have with our own intrinsic body mirrors everything outside of that. So I try to make that known for people, because a lot of times it can sound daunting to be in touch with yourself all
mm.
the time with every single meal that you eat. I don't have time for that, I'm too stressed out, I'm this, I'm that. um, that it truly is just a process of feeling. But a lot of things I tell my clients to look for are, hey, we're looking for bloating, we're looking for tired, we're looking for gas, we're looking for irritability, we're looking for a big sugar crash. And people don't really know that blood sugar is related directly to anxiety. So if you have anxiety as an individual, it's probably because you're not regulating your diet well enough. That these things are really symptomatic of each other. And I love that finally the science is starting to catch up with, like what you said, all these things that we kind of have always known to be true, but we haven't been able to prove it yet. But we're finally in the place of actually proving that and having a lot of science back behind it, which is such a beautiful evolution and kind of new world to birth into.
So how did you end up then, like where you're at now after the stint in the culinary school? Like what happened after that to get you to the work that you do now and what you're doing now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like it's been a long journey, but I basically have never stopped with any sort of self enrichment or education piece. So after the culinary school, I ended up doing a shamanic apprenticeship. I moved to Big Island of Hawaii. I lived on an organic farm. I did kind of uh, Steiner type style, so biodynamic farming, which is much more labor intensive than just even organic farming, which follows like a lunar calendar and is a lot more rhythmic, so living in rhythm with the earth. So you can see how the food in nature itself is rhythmic. So when you tap into that rhythm, that you're kind of living by the heartbeat of the earth, and there's a lot more synergy that's able to happen through that. Then traveled to Oregon, continued to do more food stuff, did a lot of jun, so fermenting jun and probiotics, kombucha. So then got really into, there's like a bridge of our gut biome and gut health, that we are literally like a microorganism. And if you think of the solar system, we're kind of like that, but it lives inside of our body. So if you're not fueling that solar system well, or you don't have a good powerhouse behind it, then things kind of, start to get a little off track. And yeah, from Oregon, let's see, I went down to Big Sur, California. I started doing a massage training at Esalen. Continued with the food path. Once I moved down to Santa Barbara, I was a private chef, but I moved to Santa Barbara to learn foundation training, which was created by chiropractors, help people get out of lower back pain. Ended up doing a yoga teacher training and then a personal training thing as well. And so certified personal trainer, I got into all of these realms of movement, of fitness, of food, and then really started to work with the nervous system through body work, and realized that a lot of all the issues that we face, all the illnesses that we face, are because we're stressed out, or because we actually don't know how to regulate our nervous systems better. So then I also show up in the world of cooking and private chefing, and that's just kind of through networking and what I love to do, because I have such a background in health and wellness. And I also just say that I'm just such a yummy person. I love things to taste good. I want things to be nourishing. I want things to hit the level of, this tastes so good, and I know that it's intrinsically so good for me, right? And how do we start to breathe all of these life to all those different worlds and bring them together? And so I feel like that's a very long-winded way of saying that's how I got where I am, but many different spinning plates, but they all synergistically kind of work together to create a healthier, holistic human, right?
Yeah. I love that you use the word yummy, because many people who maybe are just starting to think about changing the way that they eat, it's like everything. I mean, I think like the standard metaphor for like healthy food is it tastes like cardboard, like that's what people's introduction into food that is good for you doesn't taste good. And recognizing that, like, if you want to eat healthy, you're up against huge corporations that hire scientists to make food hijack your taste buds and the way that your brain works to interact with the food. And so it does take time to recalibrate to a different way of eating. But when you start to work with people, I imagine that similarly to what your experience was, is that when people get to the point where they've tried so many things and haven't found relief for just things that just make them not want to be an active participant in their lives. Like, if this is how my life is going to be, if this is how I feel, I don't really want to keep doing this. So when people get to that point where they're like, I'll do anything because I can't continue to feel like this anymore. What are some of the first steps? Because when I think about someone wanting to radically change their lives, like I just imagine this like huge wave of information and then just drowning in it and being like, okay, back to the old patterns again, back to what I know, because our brains love that so much. So what is like the first, instead of this wave coming over you, what's the first, like, take one step, put one toe in the ocean of better health?
Yeah, a lot of times I ask people where they're at. So if people, don't spend a lot of time cooking, I'm not going to ask them to step in the kitchen and start cooking right away, right? That's daunting. It's overwhelming. So depending on where people are at in their areas, I'll research different restaurants that don't use seed oils, that, are more farm to table, local, organic, so that they can have options that are available to them without necessarily having to shift their whole entire lifestyle. Biggest thing that I don't want to see in people's kitchen is cooking with oils that go rancid at a low cooking temperature. That's one of the most detrimental things that you can do to your health. And it's pretty permeated in today's society that somehow these oils are better for us. It produces a high amount of acrylamide, and acrylamide rips through as a free radical in our body and eliminates so many good, juicy, lovely minerals and things that we need to hold on to. Our body is very efficient and does that on purpose to basically keep us alive. But we have a hard time a lot of times getting those nutrients back. So I tell people to eliminate seed oils, cook with things like coconut oil, tallow, ghee, or even butter. Those are kind of like the top four. All of those things are incredibly delicious and yummy. So it's not hard to usually get people to make that shift. I tell people to eat basically grass-fed meat if they can, pasture-raised chicken if they can. And I also try to stress people out in terms of budget and finances. So I work with people where they're at too. It's always better for you to eat local than it is necessarily organic, especially if the price point of one versus other makes a big difference, right? So I'll back it up and even say that the biggest thing that is detrimental to our health is stress. So if we're stressed out about taking this thing, it's a no-go. Cool. Let's break it down. We'll do one last step, right? And I work with people very strategically to see where the stress starts to filter in, and then we back it up one step. So it always feels like that you're doing two new things until you feel like you got those two new things. Okay, we're changing the cooking oils. We're going to try and add a little bit more cooked vegetables into our diet so that we're not always bloated. Great. Let's start with those two things. Once you feel like you've got those two things, we come back on. We take another two steps. That is how anything is built, right? Is one step at a time. That's how we all reach greatness. And the same is true when it comes to our health, to our diet, how we want to live intentionally in the world. You do it one step at a time because it is incredibly overwhelming. And there's so much information out there that sometimes it feels like you don't know what to do.
Yeah, don't know where to start. I really appreciate that you even brought up like the monetary thing, because like if someone's going to think about looking at their grocery bill and being like, okay, I'm going to tack on another 25% to this to eat organically. And like you said, like if that's going to cause somebody more stress, like, okay, let's look at some other options instead of loading up on organic foods. Like what one thing can you change? Like you said, like taking out the seed oils. Can you say specifically like what that would be? I mean, like I'm thinking like vegetable oil, canola oil, avocado oil, all
Vegetable
of
oil,
them.
canola oil, avocado oil. I love olive oil. Use it raw. Olive oil goes rancid at 90 degrees. Don't cook with it. Yeah, that's a big one that I feel like a lot of people still kind of boof up on. Sesame oil is not a great cooking oil. Same thing, low cooking temperature. Grapeseed oil, any of the seeds, flaxseed oil, all of those are meant to be consumed relatively raw. They're great oils, not, shaming them in any way. They're just not necessarily meant to be cooked with. So you add those to a salad, right? And something that's raw or after the fact. People take flaxseed oil to get omegas. It's totally an avenue that you can explore if you're not getting omegas or you're vegan, right? So I think that's the biggest issue that I have with our current culture, our diet culture, our health culture. We're kind of obsessed with these things, and intrinsically something becomes bad. If it's not good for me, then it's bad. And it's like, that's not true. There's a way to use it functionally, and there's a way that it can be detrimental to your health. And that's true of everything. Like, there's an overuse of things and there's an underuse of things. There's an inappropriate use. There's a better use for. So I try and get people away from the conversation of what's better versus worse. There are certain things you want to cook with that don't go rancid at a cooking temperature that are going to be better for your health. And those are going to be more like tallow, fats, meat fats, ghee, butter, and coconut oil. Coconut oil is the only veg oil that I use to actually cook with.
Okay.
And then every other oil, I love it. I love sesame oil for oil pulling and Ayurvedic. It has such a long-standing tradition of being a good drawing out oil. And it draws out toxins. It's really good for people with dry skin. It's really good for people with moist skin. So it ends up being a tridoshic oil that people can use topically on their bodies really well. So again, I think it's what's your function behind certain things. And that's kind of what I try to drive home with people is what's the goal and what's the function of what we're trying to accomplish. Because everything has a purpose. It's just using it intentionally, right?
Yeah, I love that very, very much. I was in my biology class this term, and my biology professor was talking about how weird it is that you can have something like sodium and chloride, which are highly toxic and bad, but if you put them together, you have sodium chloride, which is table salt, and it's all about how it's being used. It's all about the combinations with other things. And so what you're talking about with the seed oils and the oils at certain temperatures, it makes perfect sense that we don't then have to demonize all of these things. It's to me, it's the same as like people who would say, don't do XYZ exercise. Well, maybe, but it also depends on like how your body moves. It depends on injuries that you have. It depends on, like things, even like where your body is holding stress. It depends on trauma. Like all of those things play into that. And so it's really is impossible to be like, okay, here's the perfect formula that works for everyone. So that go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think, to your point is we live in an advertising culture, a consumeristic culture. And I went to school partially for advertising and communications. That's what I was going to make my major in. And then I realized it was all fear mongering. And I was like, I don't want anything to do with this. And we still live in a culture where people are, don't do this because it's bad for you. They don't realize that it's a societal expectation that we live in, that's how we tell people to do things. Don't do this or you don't get dessert for dinner, whatever, however we raise our kids, how we move through the world, that there's this level of, if you do this, it's wrong. If you do this, you sin, right? So it's deep in our biology and it's very effective, but there's also a claim to, and we're starting to see this shift that we can just inform people of all the different good ways. You don't even have to hit on the bad ways. It's just, this is what's better for this, and this is what's better for this. And that can leave us out of the conversation of scaring people with what's wrong.
Yeah. And if we live in a culture where it is super fear-based, the correlation is the stress. The stress increases, and if that's one of the biggest factors in why our bodies are not functioning at the optimal ways that they can, and we're just continuing to do that, it's like perpetuating that problem. So what are some other ways, like obviously you were talking about paying attention to what we put in our body and just noticing our anxiety levels, our fear levels, our maybe a tendency to ruminate, or if it's affecting our sleep. All of those things can be affected by what we eat. But what are some of the other practices that can help people reduce stress?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say the most effective and present and available and free, just take a moment to breathe. Stop whatever you're doing, take a few good deep breaths. It's really truly where the magic is. Literally, breath is a gift of space. As we take an inhale, we expand and create space in our rib cage, right? That creates space in our nervous system, that creates space in our mind, creates this beautiful structure, literally in our physical structure, that permeates outward to create space. It's the hardest one to remember to do, especially when we're busy and we're running around and like I don't have time to stop and breathe right now. And it's like you literally always do. You're literally breathing all the time. It never stops, right? It's just how much do you want to expand and lean into that. I feel like meditation is also a gift of the breath. I feel like yoga people also use as a gift of the breath. I love a walking meditation. I personally love a sunlight meditation where you just sit in the sun and breathe and feel the warmth on your skin and actually feel the sensational things of what it means to be alive in this moment. And a lot of somatic or body work, sensory perception is, go outside, feel the grass underneath your hands, listen to the birds or whatever sounds are around you, using all 5 of your senses to really come back to home within your body and to regulate your nervous system. And that's kind of the greatest gift. And yet I feel like it's so easily forgotten.
The one that I would add to that is, as we're using our 5 exterior senses, also developing the skill of the interoception, where we're feeling our heartbeat. We're feeling what it feels like in our bodies to expand our lungs. We're feeling what our tummy rumbling and getting ourselves familiar with what each of those sensations actually means to us. That's a skill. Kids are really, really good at that. They're really good at that. And the more adult that we become, the less connected we are to that internal language. My first introduction to the internal conversation, so like developing a relationship with my body, came through the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza with the book You Are the Placebo. And as he shared about his experience of healing his traumatic spine injury through the communication, his internal communication, I was like, wait, what? That completely blew my mind, because I had never thought about being able to talk to myself in that way. And it's been really fun I've just been learning, I've been doing a deep dive into Richard Schwartz's work on internal family systems, which is really this, this psychological tool of understanding that like even our mind is not a singular functioning thing, but that we have all these different parts of ourselves, and that the sooner that we open up communication between all of those parts, and then also between what he would term the self, as in like the capital S self, is that self that always knows that it is in communion with everything, that always is aware of the interconnectedness of all things, is always aware of, the deepest levels of compassion and truth and reality. That the more that we open up those channels of communication between all the parts, the more whole and healthy we are. And so I love that that's like the combination then of our understanding of ourselves as a physical being in this material reality, but also this other aspect of this, and all of it works in tandem. When we were at that retreat, something that you said really stuck in my mind, and it just keeps rolling around in there. You were talking about the attitude that we have while we are consuming food. How we feel about the food that we're eating impacts how it works in our bodies. Can you talk more about that? Because that is like so fascinating.
Yeah, 100%. I think I coined it as how we feel when we consume is what we consume. So again, with like diet culture, health culture, if we think about eating, McDonald's or Ho Ho or whatever you deemed as, not great food, but then when we're near that food, if we choose to consume it anyways, it's outside of our values, it causes cognitive dissonance. That cognitive dissonance then spikes our, immunoglobulins. We actually have a visceral reaction to consuming that food. We actually built up a low level allergy to that food because of how we feel about it. And so much of our eating process, especially in Americans, in an incredibly privileged way, right, of being able to have access to so much food, that, bread or these other things are kind of demonized or weaponized against us because we heard something or read something on Instagram, and we never took the time to actually research if that was true, or if it's true for our bodies, or if it's true for, how we react. And so we have this very sensitive culture. We have a very feeling culture around food, when in its finest imprint, food is abundance, is God's gift to us to stay alive, is nourishment. And food is often very interestingly become neurotic. It's become a process of our neuroses to kind of, this is good and that's bad, and this is, and kind of really define and structure and control. And if you look at being in a flow state, or all of these different terminologies that have come up, that basically everything's meant to flow and work together and be this etheric synergistic system, and we've really kind of walked away from that with having all these feelings about what we consume when we consume. And I think at the retreat, I even referred to, contextual piece. If you're out in the woods for 3 days and you get lost, and you're really hoofing it out there, and you manage to find some water, but you're like, oh man, if I don't find food pretty soon, I might die. Like, and I'm really scared for my life. And that survival instinct comes in play, and you're walking, and all of a sudden you somehow find a remnants of a Happy Meal, and it hasn't broken down yet because it's a Happy Meal, that there's a part of you that is so happy, quite literally, that it has all the preservatives, and that you get to eat some chicken McNuggets. You don't even care what's in them or what they are, that there is a deep resonance of sustenance and gratitude for being able to sustain life. And that's the vibration of food. And yet in today's world, we've changed it to such a different meaning or output or context. And, it's how do we find our way back to truly being grateful in each moment for all that we have and the abundance that supports us.
Yeah. It's the visual that came up is just this, like, it's like we're priming ourselves to ingest the food in whatever way we feel. So if I'm like bringing something close to my mouth that I have, like you're saying, that I have this, like, this food is bad, then that is releasing chemicals in my body to prepare me to eat something that is bad. So even if it's not quote unquote bad for my body would be fine with it, or maybe my body would like it. It's the awareness or the stories that we tell ourselves that then change how we react with that food that we're eating. That just delighted me to no end and blew my mind a lot. And it has made me much more aware of how I am feeling about the thing that I'm eating before I eat it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like, I mean, that to me is like, that's what the practice of praying before you eat. That's, I mean, to me, that's how I would interpret that practice. It's those moments of gratitude where we're seeing the food for what it is. Like you're saying, it's the sustenance, it's the providing of from Mother Nature, from God, for our body, our organism to continue to function the way that it needs to.
Mm-hmm. 100%. Um, yeah, and that our body is such a well-built, efficient machine that it can do a lot with very, very little. And um, yeah, we've overlaid, the mind is so powerful. And like you said, the placebo effect. So it goes both ways. There's
Mm.
placebo effects that benefit us, which I think is generally what the placebo effect is referred to. But there's also, the hypochondriacs or the over worry of things that you can physically make yourself sick. And I
Mm.
see it most with food because people are scared of it and they don't know what to do with it. And I read that you're not supposed to have gluten, you're not supposed to have fat, and that, now raw salads and kale can make your thyroid sick. And all these things where they literally don't know what to eat anymore. And that's such a hard place to be in because essentially, in the most fundamental level, all this food exists on planet Earth, whether it be the animals to the plants to everything in between, to provide us with some level of nourishment. That's it.
Mm. It's a really interesting problem that exists in a different way in a very wealthy country.
Yes.
Because if you were in a place where food is more scarce, you don't have these, like, exactly what you're saying with your illustration of going through the woods and finding a Happy Meal. If that is your reality from day to day, you don't have the same stories.
Totally.
It's a problem it's a problem that comes with abundance.
100%. And I also, that's a part of an awareness piece that I try to bring is that it's a privilege. Like people don't
Mm.
realize they see it as such a problem and they're a victim to it. And it is entirely a privilege on planet Earth to be picky about what you can or can't eat because not like I would say most of the world doesn't get to do that, right?
Yeah.
Not that that changes that, there's still a fundamental problem. I'm not gaslighting anybody and saying that your, inability to be clear on what to eat and what works for your body isn't true. That is an issue. But it's also partly how we've generated wealth in this area is how we've commercially farmed all the pesticides that we have put in so that other things won't eat it and then we eat
Mm.
it makes us sick, right? So that's part of the conversation piece too is why are we spraying Roundup on everything when we found out years later that Roundup makes us sick? Why do we have monocrops when they're incredibly profitable and they drive food prices down so that we can feed a large
Mm.
portion of our population, but essentially it ends up making them very sick. So, within that, there's also a synergy of how do we live within small closed chain structures that support the Earth's viability so that we support our Earth's ourselves, our own viability,
Mm.
because we aren't separate from it at all.
So as people are learning what works for their own bodies and they're becoming aware of the stories that they're telling themselves around food, they're adopting practices that help lower and reduce stress.
Yes.
What are some of the other ways that people can I guess develop, because really, like, what it comes down to is developing that skill of the internal listening.
Mm-hmm.
And it's difficult when, I mean, I guess I can speak for my own experiences when we this age of the internet have access to more information than at any other point in human history.
Right.
At some point we have to say, okay, I have to trust that there is somebody else who knows more than I do about this particular thing. And so we do have to rely on other people's wisdom and knowledge about certain things in order to make decisions, because we just don't have the bandwidth to educate ourselves on all the levels of everything. So that also then requires some level of internal trust that you know, can parse out who to listen to and who not to listen to. But from your own experience, what does it feel like to trust yourself?
Well, I would say it's not, a lot of people hear that, and like even when you said it, I heard it as like, oh yeah, you're always like in the flow and you're
Yeah.
always doing everything perfectly and you always know. Sometimes trusting yourself means making a mistake and knowing that you will realize at some point that it has been a mistake, and then you make a different direction. And it's a process of learning. Um, so I don't think that there's like such an easy like, okay, cool, I trust myself and I'm
Right.
just doing it and it's perfect now, right? Because that's how we want it to be and it sounds
Yeah.
nice that way. But essentially it's more this process of, okay, I think this is the right direction. And so I'm going to go in this direction. And sometimes I go way too far in that direction. And I'm like, oop, that's too far. That's not the answer. We'll dial it back. We'll do a little bit more in moderation. That it ends up being a sensory experience, I think, that you're kind of blindly and really feeling into what works and what doesn't work, and that you're consistently adjusting or readjusting. I would say where a medical professional or somebody else comes in with a higher authority is to, I guess, give you the parameter of kind of what you're blindly feeling for, right? Because if you don't know or you don't have
Mm.
conversation, it's impossible for you to blindly feel into things. But when you start seeking help from other people or coaches or medical professionals, that they can kind of guide you to, hey, these are the confines that you're kind of starting to feel for. So feel into those things. And it gives you a vocabulary and a language that maybe you didn't have before, that then you can kind of start to trust your own process of, cool. So I did these protocols that you suggested. I took these supplements. My digestion got a lot better. I'm no longer constipated, or I no longer have diarrhea. That you start to see the symptoms or the I guess checkpoints that people would look for, and you kind of then get to have the feedback with your body when someone else provides the language of, I guess, what the checklist is, right?
Mm. I love that idea of viewing even the most educated specialists in any particular field as only being able to point you in the direction where to look. That they're, showing you a container and saying, okay, like within this container, find the things that work for you or find the things that don't work for you. And that it always is like the truth is that all of us are the ultimate authority on what happens inside of us. Always,
100%.
always, always. And
Uh,
that we should always be very wary of anyone that says that they know better than you do.
yep, 100%. And I will top that with, if you are spending money, it's okay to spend money. It's okay to check out different people. It's okay to, resource things outside of yourself. If you have been doing something with somebody for longer than 2 to 3 months and you have seen zero progress, you need to find somebody else. And that's
Mm.
therapy. That's true for a doctor. That's true for a chiropractor. That's true for a surgeon. I have so many people that are really in the system and in a process with somebody that they really like, but they're not getting better. And I'm
Mm.
like, it's cool that you like them. Maybe try to be their friend or like shift that relationship. But if you're not actually getting
Uh,
better, you're wasting your money, right? And like just to have someone kind of say it in such a candid way that a lot of times people are like, yeah, I guess I never thought about it. I've been seeing this chiropractor for 3 years and I still have this radiating nerve pain. And I'm like, great, like go see
mm.
anyone else. Um,
That's
yeah,
a
that was
really good point. That's a really good point. And that's I even just having that like parameter of 2 to 3 months is so helpful, because I do think, when we operate in life with like a hope that we're going to get better,
mhm,
if you're like, oh, maybe if I just give it 6 more months, it's going to
right.
solve this problem that I've had for years. But I think that's a really sound advice to, if you're not seeing any kind of improvement or any shifts or adjustments whatsoever in your body or in your mind, then maybe it's time to try a different method.
Yep. Yep. And
S-
sometimes the method is not completely different. It's just a different human who's got a better fit or a little more
Hmm.
insight or a little more experience. And I'm not saying that, there's a lot of different people out there, and there's a lot of different people with different experience. And sometimes you just find someone who's a little more cued into whatever specifically you're going through. And so again, it's not necessarily that these other people aren't doing a good job. It's just that they're at the place that they're at. And it might not be the best fit for wherever you're at.
Hmm. That's so great. It's what I hear from that is like, just don't be afraid of failing. And it's because it's not even really failing. It's still just testing. Be a good little scientist and run your experiments and see if your hypothesis was correct. And if not, then run some different experiments. So you do work with food, and then you also are working with people's bodies as a body worker. What kinds of things does that involve, and how does that fit into kind of like the bigger, I don't know, I'm seeing this like trend of like this personal mission puzzle that's coming together with how you feel about the work that you're doing in the world.
Totally. Yeah. So with body work, I think the biggest thing that I see is people's inabilities to regulate their own nervous systems. And I'll call myself out too. I'll say, ironically, I chose body work because I'm really good at being quick and fast and like smart and and like doing the private chef thing. And I've got like 7 different things on the stove, and I'm jamming and I'm vibing, I'm into it. But I'm exhausted at the end of the day. You know what I mean? Where I'm like, whoo, like, okay, I drank all the caffeine, I did all the things, and I did it. But how I feel, if I'm truly listening to that, feels like, yeah, I was really pushing the threshold of what was comfortable for me in that experience. And it's good to do those things. It's not good to do it all the time, right? So if I'm doing that 100% of the time, then I have a fundamental problem and I'm in burnout. So for me, I was like, what out of all the different hats that I carry, which one can I lean into the most that's going to give me more of the results that I want? And body work, time and time again, is the most regulated thing that you could possibly be doing, right? As humans, we love connection, we love touch, and we love regulation. So massage or body work is essentially all 3 of those things. And a lot of people ask me, how do you not take on what other people are feeling or what they're going through? Or and that seems like such a missed, again, that's like a fear-based thing that somehow something that somebody else has is going to get stuck in me. It's like it's not really how the puzzle quite works, but if we're doing a healing thing and they're regulated and they're in a theta state, I'm in a theta state, everybody's regulated, everybody's experienced touch, everyone experiences connection. Who's losing in this situation? Nobody is. So I love it for that aspect. And I think, again, the biggest part of health and healing is a low stress lifestyle. Now, not saying that that's easy to maintain, because we live in a very high, fast-paced society. We've got cell phones, we've got emails, we've got all these things that compete for our attention at almost all times. And so really being able to singularly step into one presently, each at a time, is the work, right? It's the practice. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it totally did. We've touched on this, an understanding of like how the nervous system works a couple of times now in this conversation, but I do feel like, people who don't dig down into that can just feel like, oh yeah, I need a regulated nervous system. Like, what does this actually mean when we're talking about having our nervous systems working in the best way possible?
Yeah. So I would describe it as kind of when you wake up first thing in the morning, there's like a thoughtfulness, a coming to, a slowness, a stillness, um, a whimsicalness of being human and alive. That is a regulated nervous system state. That's probably the most regulated that you're going to be throughout the whole day, right? And then we go and we do things throughout the day. You can think about being late to work. You actually feel that when you look at the clock, right? There's a visceral reaction that it almost feels like something inside of you kind of drops and you're like, oh, I got to get on it. And, you start to hustle. That is actually a spike in cortisol. And that spike in cortisol then deregulates your nervous system. Or, for example, we don't eat enough. And so our blood sugar spikes, and our blood sugar spikes to signal to us that we need to go out there and search for food. Otherwise, we're going to die. It's a survival mechanism that then makes our anxiety go up. So there's these very biochemical processes that happen when we're existing in modern day life that we're maybe not always aware of, but it's a feeling state. It's a somatic awareness practice that if you consistently are being triggered, or I'm late, or I got to rush, or I got to do this, and I got to make dinner for the kids, and that's, every woman alive basically at this point, it's like, and I got to do all of these things and maintain the home and make sure everything's clean and the parents are coming and this and that, that we start to just go at a speed that seems a little bit, quote, what we call dysregulated, which is that if you were to operate at that speed at all time, your physical sense process, your actual physical body cannot keep up at that speed at all times. That's why people get sick. That's why we get disease. That's why we get illness, because the body is like, whoa, like, great. It's good for you to be productive. I can't metabolize life that quickly, and you're moving way past my capacity. So we're going to get you to slow down, and we're going to back it up. That is why we get sick. And I also love to point out to my clients when they're like, well, I have all these things to do. And I'm like, okay, well, what if you got sick next week? And they're like, well, obviously I'd like call out of work because I can't go to work sick. And it's like, isn't it funny that every time we get sick, we always make time to slow down? Everything else stops. You get to call out of work. You get to actually slow down. You get to spend days at home taking care of yourself, doing laundry, whatever it is. Wouldn't it be nice if we listened to that before we had to push our bodies so far that it made us get sick, so that we'd slow down? Because we always find the time for it when we actually get ill. Why can't we find the time before? And it's this culture that we live in that's very go, 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 that somehow it seems not okay or inappropriate or wrong. And the reality of the situation is that it's just not how we as human beings are hardwired at all.
That's a perfect way to say it, that we do not allow or encourage people to be in touch with themselves enough to know, I need to slow down, before the body just says like, we've had enough. And I like the way that you describe the nervous system, like the part of ourselves that responds to our environment by releasing certain chemicals and hormones in order for us to do the things that we need to do. So if we think about it like in a primitive sense, it would be like, I'm just hunting for berries and everything's really chill. And then I see a predator, like my body is going to respond to that visual and auditory stimulation, say danger, danger, flood of hormones, all the constrictions in all the places, in order to make sure that my muscles are ready to fire and get me out of danger. And when in this environment, we still see predators everywhere. We still see threats to our survival everywhere, even when they're not there. And so if we keep ourselves in a state of that heightened awareness and all of those things firing, that's when we're talking about, like, that is literally what burnout is the fuel isn't there anymore. And so your body is telling you, I can't do this anymore. I can't continue to run. I can't continue to operate at this speed. And when we think about like, what practices or habits do we have that are keeping ourselves in that fight or flight state all the time? Like, I even just think about watching the news. My brain doesn't know the difference between something that might be happening to me in an hour and something that will probably never happen to me because it's happening across the globe, or that the likelihood of that happening to me is very, very low. My body and my brain don't know the difference. And so if we're not being aware and careful of what we're not just consuming, putting in our mouths, but consuming by putting into our minds, that can also then contribute to a dysregulated nervous system.
100%. Yep.
So it's like a call to this mindfulness. I love that you describe how you describe waking up in the morning and like before all of the to-dos and before checking the emails and checking the notifications and the alarms and all of that. That's a really lovely place to try and remind ourselves to get to throughout our day. But if we don't ever slow down enough to feel what that feels like, how do we know what to get to?
Would agree. That's also why, I go back to the breath, just taking breaths. One of the biggest things I work with clients is set a timer on your phone for whatever you think is reasonable, whether it's every 3 hours, whether it's every hour, whether it's every half an hour. Set a timer, know that that's your moment to pause, to actually take a breath, and then keep going. That creating and cultivating that little bit of space in your day-to-day is going to have such a profound impact on your health, your digestion. That's the other biggest thing, is that like digestion happens in rest and digest. It's a parasympathetic nervous system state. So if we are never in a parasympathetic nervous system state, We don't assimilate food. We don't take on nutrients. We don't actually rest and digest. So we're starting to see, this parallel of, well, if I'm always like da 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 and up here and I have all these issues with my gut and I've got skin issues and this and my body's not working correctly. And it's like, yeah, it literally cannot. We have
Mm.
constricted so tight that we are in that fight or flight. We're in adrenal fatigue. We're in burnout. Um, that when we start to shift into rest and digest and parasympathetic and create space for that, and realizing that, realistically, most times people create space because they have to. They don't have another choice,
Right.
right? They're literally like going to die or they're sick or they're like,
Mhm.
I cannot, I'm in so much pain that I need to make a different choice. And that's why the body is this beautiful relationship that we have, because it keeps us in our integrity and it keeps us reverent of, great, there's a better way to do things. Let's figure out how that is. So that people then become highly motivated to actually create the space to regulate, to slow down, to learn about themselves and their bodies, to learn about how when they think certain thoughts, they feel things, and those feelings create a cascade of endocrine, hormones and different things that pump throughout the body that actually create a visceral response to whatever we're moving through in the world. Um, yeah, and I just think it's such a beautiful, we live in it, such a high piece of like technology machine, of a reverent machine that consistently just works for our benefit all the time. And I think that's the biggest piece, is we always see the body as something that we're trying to control or fight against, when the reality of the situation is the body is trying to teach you how to use yourself, your energy, your time here on planet Earth as efficiently and abundantly as you possibly can. It is always working in your favor, 100%.
That is such a powerful mental shift, because I think many people, particularly who have chronic illness, see their bodies as their enemy.
Yes.
And I see what you're saying as practices to bring us back into right whole relationship with this amazing this amazing piece of equipment, I guess, or technology that it is a relationship. And I think that on the path towards, wholeness and healing, that the more that we can fall in love with ourselves and have self-directed compassion, not only is that going to make a difference in our overall systems, but that also then translates to how we
Yes.
respond and react in relationship to other people and to our environments. Because if, especially like, if you stub your toe and you're in pain, that's the only thing that you can think about is how much your toe hurts. And it makes it difficult to be nice to your partner, nice to your friends, because you're in pain. And so
Yeah.
if we can adopt this awareness and this reciprocal relationship before we get to the point where we're in pain, the better off we're going to be.
100%. And that's what I try to make clear to people, is the relationship that you have with your body is a mirror to the relationship that you have with everything else. So whether it be your loved ones, the planet Earth, how you respond to it, how you ask questions, what's
Mm.
going on with you. I'm curious about why we have this radiating nerve pain. It gets us to really think about how we're moving and using our body throughout the day-to-day world. But pain is simply just, hey, user error. If you
Mm.
keep using it this way, there's going to be a critical problem. There's going to be a real big problem. So I'm just letting you know that you've got to shift. And then that's the fun, right? Is like, well, what do I have to shift? Is it the way that
Mm.
I sit when I drive? Is it how I sit in a chair? Is it the way that I sit at work and use my hand with the mouse? Is it how my shoulders positioned when I'm at work all day? That you like really get to be thoughtful about this pain that you have in this area of the body and what you consistently do with that area of the body on a day-to-day basis that would allow that to happen. And I think that's, kind of the evolution that we're headed towards, is how do we stay engaged with these processes and how do we become curious about what it is that's going on, rather than upset or angry or frustrated or shut down immediately, because it's a very human experience. I mean, we all have a body, right? We all go through these things on some level. And so then that's also part of what intrinsically connects us to everyone else, because there's such a beautiful story there of, how did you get through it? What happened for you? What ended up being true for you? And they're all little like cues to how to integrate more deeply.
Mm. What I hear in that is like that there's not really any room. Curiosity doesn't leave any room for us to to criticize ourselves. So like, you big dumb idiot, why did you eat that? Or like, why do you feel like this or whatever? And to pursue relationship with curiosity instead is like, there's no room for criticism. There's no room for a lack of compassion for ourselves. And
Totally.
I mean, really, that is like the key to harmony in our relationships too, is when we can set aside the stories or the beliefs about our badness or other people's badness, and view, I mean, from my perspective, like to view everyone is doing the best that they can, and that anything that gets in the way of that is just because we don't remember who we really are.
Totally.
We've just forgotten.
Yeah.
And we have access to being able to learn that again, relearn it.
Yeah. 100%.
So we talked about ways to reduce stress. Some of the most basic things that would be helpful for people to just get out of their cupboards as soon as possible, or to use in a different way. We talked about the way that we think about the things that we eat, and we talked about developing a compassionate and reciprocal relationship with our bodies. Are there any other things that come to mind that you feel like if I could just somehow put this belief or understanding into everyone's brains, it would be this?
I would say if you can nail those three,
Okay. Awesome.
like you got it. You've ascended, you're enlightened, you're doing the thing. I feel like those three are pretty consistent self-work that will keep you occupied for a long time. Because like I said, it's a moving target. Things shift and change over time. But they are good places and good anchoring points of doing the work of guiding yourself home. So I would say those three kind of nail it right on the head.
Awesome. What is something that is, as a lifelong learner, I assume that there are things that come across your path all the time that just absolutely delight you. What's something that is delighting you recently?
I think the biggest thing is that, I chose bodywork to help regulate my nervous system a little bit more. And it's been working absolute wonders for my health and for all of these things that, I've been trying to find answers to this, and like things just kind of miraculously disappear when you make the space to be present and to be truly centered or, embodied in whatever your experience is at that moment. And I think in this world, we're very disembodied, or we want to go have a drink, or we want to smoke, or we want to eat more food, and we eat as a way to cope. And we're kind of always searching for these answers outside of ourselves, that if you actually just make the space to be with whatever it is, there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of synergy within that, and there's a lot of healing within that. So it's been a really beautiful thing to discover, because it's not about all the stuff outside of you. It's just simply what's happening within you. That's it. Real easy. It's free.
Right.
It's there 100% of the time, whenever you want to pick it up. Like
always available.
Yep.
That really is all the entertainment that we need. There's plenty there.
Yeah.
Can you talk about your company really briefly before we sign off?
100%. So I freeze dry organs from from sheep, and I do liver, heart, and kidney. And I run it through a Chinese medicine model. So I blend some of the organs with different herbs to support that specific organ. So I do a heart blend, a kidney blend, and a liver blend. Through the Chinese medicine model, heart is the ability to experience more joy. Kidney is the ability to work through fear, and liver is through anger. So kind of using an emotional component as well as the actual organ itself, as well as different herbs that support that. And then I also have a tri blend, which is all three organs blended together. I don't specifically do just liver, because just liver can be really hard on your own liver, as it's really high in vitamin A, which can be hard for our liver to process. So there's a little bit more of a synergistic approach to that. And company name is Origin Organs. I source the organs out of Ojai, which is pretty local to me. And I freeze dry the organs, smear with them, put them in a capsule so that we can take them in small gram doses. Take 2 capsules at a time. Each one of those grams ends up being really high in a whole plethora of peptides, minerals, vitamins. So it's kind of nature's multivitamin. If you think about evolutionarily as how we evolved as humans, most of us would as a tribe, kill a animal, and we would eat the organs fresh.
Mm.
And then we would smoke and preserve meats, and that would be kind of what got us through the winter or the tough times of, what was to come. And I think there's just such a intuitive language that, when we look at healing the body or being at peace or oneness with ourselves, using the things that got us to where we have gotten to now in evolution are probably going to be our best bet, rather than these like chemical made, man-made, lab-made, synthetic things. I'm not saying that they're not great or they don't have their function, but I'm saying to rely on just those feels like a step back from kind of holistic health and where we're headed. That if we eat a biodiverse diet, that these things really do provide for us, and organ meats have really dropped off, and especially in American culture. So I'm finding lots of health for women in particular with fertility, with regulating PMS, menstrual cramps, men and their ability to up their sperm count, that, organ meats really truly are such a bioavailable superfood for humans today.
Hmm. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. This may not be something that that is something that we can explore a little bit. I want to do my own investigation into this, but I had read something about like whatever the stress state is of the animal that you consume, that can have an impact on your own stress systems and your cortisol production. Is that something that you've looked into at all? Is that
No, I would say that's
accurate?
I would say that's 100% true, and I think that's why a lot of people end up being vegan, is because a lot of animals are not raised well or slaughtered well. That being said, I definitely source sheep out of Ohio that are regeneratively raised, so they do fire brush mitigation. So basically, that just means they like cruise around and eat whatever's available to them. So looking at the quality of life that your animals have before you consume them is pretty important. Also, not to be a stressor factor for people. If it feels like it stresses you out, be honest about that, and you can eat whatever you need to until you get to that point that you want to look at that. I think of being human as peeling back layers of an onion, whereas, just you're the one setting your own pace. If it feels stressful, leave a layer. You don't have to peel it back. But when you're ready, that layer will be there, and you can dive into it whenever you're ready to get to it.
So if someone is committed to being a vegan or a vegetarian, obviously, like many of the things that we talked about still fit in perfectly fine with those choices. But are there other things that you could think of off the top of your head for my listeners who happen to be vegetarian or vegan that can address some of these things without using any animal products at all?
Yeah, so Irish sea moss with burdock and bladderwrack has all of your essential trace minerals that you could possibly need as a human experience. So it's a great place to start. That's kind of like my go-to for people. And then I would say the second place is make sure that you're getting enough protein, which is such an said thing to vegans and vegetarians, but it really is true. The human body does need a lot of protein. It's one of the macronutrients that most people are deficient in. And all sorts of weird things really start to happen when we are protein deficient, like skin issues, eczema, psoriasis, gut dysbiosis. There's a whole list of things that happen when we're not at that functioning. So it's very important for vegans and vegetarians to make sure that they're getting enough protein and that they're sourcing it well.
Do you have just like a quick grab calculation for how many grams of protein people should be getting every day?
I think it's 1 kilogram per body weight or something lower to that. I know for women it's supposed to be like close to 85 if you're like 100, 85 grams if you're like 130 pounds.
Okay.
So it's fairly close, and that's within a day, so you would be breaking that up through 3 meals or however you want to do that. But it's fairly close to your body weight.
Okay. Thank you. I know I kind of like went off on a little practical tangent there for a second, but I appreciate all of your wisdom and your insights so much. Thank you for taking time to share your heart with people and to share what will help improve people's lives greatly.
Awesome. Of course. And thank you so much for having me on today. So appreciate connecting with you.
Me too. Thank you, Kristen. And for everyone that's listening, before we go, P.S. we expire.